Hey, folks, we're on for a good discussion on the Simply Trade podcast. Lalo and I are going to have a great discussion with somebody today that is an expert in their field. But with that, I will say so much has been going on. I mean, I got to tell you, Lalo, it is, if we were a news program, you wait 5 minutes and you're already behind because it is so much happening today.
That's exactly right. And to your point, how fast things are moving. And today is Monday, the Monday after the announcement that was made last week on Friday regarding export controls on software. In this case, Anthropic, that the U.S. government directed Anthropic to not allow access to their Fable 5 and Mythos 5 models. So it's still ongoing. I mean, as of today, but it is something that caused a lot of like buzz, and my LinkedIn was full of just like comments on that, and I guess eventually Anthropic decided to just not release it. They didn't want to run the risk that a foreign national, was going to get a hold of it. And just for those that are listening, of course, I would think, Andy, don't you think? I mean, mostly or a lot of people that are listening who are trade professionals understand the idea that even if you are a foreign national, let's say Chinese, and you're in the United States, and if you had access to those models, that's still considered an export. I guess for the general audience that are not in the industry, and that's literally what that means. That Anthropic would be held accountable if that was to happen.
Any company for that. I mean, Anthropic
Well,
is a good example of it, but
yeah,
I mean, any company, if you've got foreign nationals,
right.
and global companies do, a lot of them are, whether it is a permanent employee, a contracted employee, or whatever, we're going to be talking about situations where what do these folks have access to, and are you liable for that? In other words, databases and records and things of your systems, whether they're here in the States or around the world, right?
Yeah, that's correct. And so I guess to help us understand this a little bit better, we're actually going to be focusing and targeting EU and foreign companies, having the US having that reach of US export controls on products and transactions or whatnot that are happening outside of the United States, and how those export controls affect them. I've been recently seeing quite a few posts from our next guest. She has been posting quite a bit, and it's like hit my algorithm or my feed so much that I thought I'd invite her onto the show, and I'm so glad that she decided to come on. She is joining us from Poland. Her name is Anna Goncz. She's had experience for over 13 years across the EU, the UK, and export controls. She has worked in the aerospace industry, semiconductors, defense, technology, automotive, and she's also the founder of a business called Export Compliance Academy. And that's where I have seen her posts. That's where I have seen a lot of her trending posts regarding how she makes export controls a lot easier to understand. She uses this approach called CLEAR, CLEAR, which each letter stands for something, and hopefully she'll let us know what that is.
This is going to be a show that you probably need to pull in some of your top IT folks along with your legal side and your compliance. So, Anna, welcome to our show. I'm looking forward to our discussion. And I will say also, folks, she's a great person when she's also an equestrian. We were talking offline that she has a couple of horses.
She's just missing the cowboy hat. So, but anyway.
Yeah. So welcome to our show.
Hi, Andy. Hi, Lalo. Thank you very much for such a great introduction. And yes, I'm missing a cowboy hat. That's true. But yes, thank you very much. This is a great opportunity to actually share, how the US export controls reach non-US companies in the EU, particularly today, but it's going to be applicable to companies outside of EU as well. So as you already said in the introduction, I've been in export compliance for more than 13 years. And most recently, I founded the Export Compliance Academy, where I teach a clear way. And it is the way that basically translate the complex regulations into nice and manageable, easy to understand structure. So C stands for classification, L for legislation, meaning which jurisdiction apply to you in a given moment of the transaction or opportunity. E is evaluate, because you always have to evaluate what you already know and decide whether you can proceed. A is act. So, audits, uh, risk assessment. This is something for you. This is ongoing process that you need to do. And R is regulate. So make sure you document everything. You have processes in place so you are able to defend them later. And that structure really proves been working for many to understand the export compliance.
Fantastic. Fantastic. So, with the recent example or the example of the recent announcement that Lalo had mentioned, why don't you open up with your opinion on what about the announcement and what that kind of means to you?
So the Anthropic can basically removal access for the third country nationals and foreign nationals. That basically means that most likely anyone would have who would need access to this would either have to apply for an export license to the US government. That's probably what it means. And basically, when before we thought this is great, we all have access even outside of United States. Now it's kind of moved back to the fact that it's export controlled, and therefore anybody who needs an access to that if from outside US will have to basically request it. And it's going to be case by case. So what might happen is some companies will not get it because US really wants to protect that part of a technology that they have.
All right. So here's the thing that I'm hearing from that is almost immediately a level of bureaucracy is going to have to be established within companies. So folks, listen to this from a legal perspective. This is, legal, you need to look at this from a standpoint and get with your compliance and say, I don't care what company it is, if you do business internationally and you have people accessing your system, this is something that you immediately need to take a look at, because those rules and regulations can get you into big time trouble. And you need to figure out with your, one, the policy, legal needs to look at it. And from a policy, you need to look and say, okay, it's only US based folks or citizens for these systems. Foreign nationals can have access to maybe other types of systems, but regardless, you need to protect it. But then secondly, your IT folks are going to have to figure out a way by user ID, if you will, and all of that. What access can this person have? Well, they already do that. But I mean, in looking at it, you're probably going to have to get your HR department involved and look at all that. So this is going to be a collaborative effort on managing your company. This isn't necessarily a strategic, let's expand into other markets kind of a thing. It's more of how do I manage and protect myself now for the day in and day out functionality. Does that sound pretty much right?
That is very much correct. I think what's important is making sure that you do have somehow of a system in place that reviews those accesses and give accesses as per request, reviewing whether the given person can actually have that access or whether there is a licensing requirement to be established first before they can have access to it.
But Anna, I think it goes beyond that, though. No, I mean, of course, we're talking about technology, and
Mm-hmm.
I think that's like the easiest thing to, not the easiest thing, but the thing that you might think, okay, yeah, we don't want people to access technology. But what about, I mean, it's obviously also physical goods. What if, like, you design a transponder for trucks in the EU to track them? We do that in the US. We do it all over the world, not just in the US, but a transponder. You design this real cool transponder so you can make sure that deliveries are on time or what. It doesn't matter. You're doing that, but it has GPS maybe or has some technology that might be controlled by the US for whatever reason, even though you're manufacturing that in the EU. I guess what I'm trying to say is even though you're a European company manufacturing in the EU and you think you're not susceptible to US controls, it could mean that a chip or something that was US manufactured is going into that transponder. That's when it affects you, correct? I mean, that's what I got from our conversation. Am I correct on that?
So, so yeah, this this my favorite topic. U.S. export controls, and I'm keep saying that to my academy participants as well, are probably the only one currently in the world that are extraterritorial. What it means is that the regulation, U.S. export control regulations, follows the item. So if I give you an example, you're manufacturing this transponder, and then you say, okay, we needed a chip that will come from United States. So we say it's a US origin chip. If you embed that into your transponder, what's going to happen is you're going to have to look at the value of your end product versus value of the chip to see if there is a certain threshold in the regulations. Most destinations have 25% or more. If that chip is worth, in a simple words, 25% or more of your end product, your transponder will be subject to the US export controls. And what does it mean is, even though you manufacture it in Europe and you want to, let's say, export it somewhere to your customers around the world, you might end up having an export control license from local government in the EU, I don't know, let's say Poland, but also a re-export license from the US government to be able to do that. So that shows basically how, in a simple word, that's called the de minimis rule. And this is only one of the rules that apply to that sort of space of extraterritoriality. We already talked about, this foreign nationals. That's another piece to it. There is also two more that, we can talk about. So here we talk about goods that are purely US origin embedded into a product. It could be a US origin items just sent to Europe and you export it further. That's also going to be subject to the US export controls. And there is a third piece to it, which is it's not that it's the rule that came, not that long ago, probably a few years back. It's called foreign direct product rule, which means even more complex, because what it means is you might be having a product manufactured in Europe, but you decide to take some technology of the US. And that means that if you manufacture that product according to the US technology, then the product becomes subject to the US regulations as well. Does that make
So
sense?
I get it. There is U.S. regulations are reaching beyond the U.S. borders in a sense, is what you're getting at. Here's the question. Let's take that transponder
Mm-hmm.
example. That's Lalo, that's a good example. In that transponder scenario, a European company is manufacturing that, decide to use a U.S. chip.
Mm-hmm.
So they import that or export it from the U.S. and import it into into Europe. They put it in the transponder. Who's responsible now for getting that export license if it requires one? Is it the European company
Okay,
or what?
so it could work both ways, meaning that the responsibility is always with the exporter. So if you think about it, it's going to be the
Okay.
exporter in Europe. But a few years back, US BIS didn't allow foreign company to apply for BIS export licenses. What's happened is that has changed now. So therefore, the foreign company can register and apply for a re-export license themselves, which means that the exporter can do that. Normally, what happens is if you procure something from the US company, it's easier than the US company covers any potential re-export if known at the point of shipment, because there could be some exclusion on destinations like China, for example. There could be some exclusion on entities and so on. So I think that the best way is to work it with your supplier. And if you end up sort of, for whatever reason, getting it from distributor that doesn't deal with necessarily with that, then you're going to be responsible to obtain that.
I don't know if you can answer this question. Usually I look at things with the rules and regulations and I try and understand the intent behind
Hmm.
them. What
Hmm.
is it overall in these US export controls are trying to accomplish? Can you I mean, if a US product now is going into in this case, our example is a European product,
Hmm.
what's the intent of if a license is required? It seems kind of bureaucratic.
It is, but there are several reasons why, there is a licensing requirement. Export controls really are around national security,
Mhm.
proliferation, and weapons of mass destruction. So, in a simple term, it's making sure that these technologies or these products do not end up in the wrong hands. So, U.S. government is known for this, that they are very controlling at the high level. So, this is why the extraterritoriality piece is here. So therefore, they don't want their chip to end up somewhere that they don't want them to end up. And, recent example from Europe, there was a company called Excite in Germany that they had to pay $1.5 million of fine for they didn't even export it themselves, the goods. What happened is they exported to distributor in China. It was technically low level control. It was EAR 99, which is known for very low level of control, but they didn't mark it. They didn't put the classification that it's a US origin and it's the EAR 99. Send it to distributor in China, and Chinese distributor re-exported it in China to the entity that is on entity list, meaning is prohibited to receive those goods. What happened is the company thought, well, let's do a voluntary disclosure to say, yeah, we've done it. US government took it, but they say, well, I'm sorry, it's going to be a 1.5 million fine. So this shows basically how broad that is and how, far this can reach the US export controls.
Wow. Wow. Okay, so with all this that's going on, what and you were talking about, there's other scenarios we're talking about, like foreign nationals having access to systems
Hmm.
and the deal here with the products and all. It's like now, well, do I want to even export? I mean, goodness, this is like scaring me half to death. What do you suggest companies do in this situation here?
Okay, so I think first of all, classification. Like, do not even attempt exporting. And I'm sure many US companies understand that who do the export that, even to go through customs, they need to classify their goods. Now, you need to classify it properly for export control purposes. This is not the same as customs classification, and see whether your product is controlled under BIS CCO list. Is it not lower level control? Is it ITA? Probably not, because that's a very high level and specific. And basically, whenever you exporting it out to your customer, your partners, your subsidiaries, because this is where the many companies trip. It's they think the subsidiaries are okay to ship, and that's not a problem. That's the end. So I think what's important is to classify, making sure that once you understand what you're handling, then think about it. What's going to be the next step? What's your customer going to do with it? What, in Europe, we're going to have to, whenever we manufacture, distribute and stuff, we're going to have to think back about the US export controls, find out whether it's a US origin. But when the US company exports, it's important they mark the documentation with the classification if this product is subject to ECC and CCO, and put it out so it's visible and so that can be understood by the companies outside of United States as well.
Okay, so before we keep going down the road, let's say you've got a good sized company here that's looking at who would be responsible within that company to classify those
Mhm.
goods? Would that be the compliance department or is this something else?
It's really varies, it depends on the company size. It depends on what company does. It could be engineered together with a trade compliance person. It could be engineering themselves. It could be, dedicated product classification team. It varies. It all depends as to who is the closest, really, who's got most knowledge and who can verify this. I myself, when I do the classification, I really talk to engineers because, I've been in many industry and I'm not a technical person. Like when they explain to me, where is the wing or where is the back of the airplane, then I know that. But then apart from that, I would not know any technicalities. So, it's always good to have a engineering guys helping you understand as to what's the real technical performance of your product and whether they can actually fall into that control list.
Okay. So, again, for our listeners, in classifying that first step, that's a teamwork effort. But more specifically, it sounds like whoever would have the compliance function along with your engineering, like you said, and whomever else is close enough to that product. So, okay, we're going to classify it. And now we know who we need to go to say, what do we have is basically what you're saying. All
Correct.
right.
Yeah. And then, that's the C for clear in my
Yeah. Right.
methodology. And this is where everything really starts because without that, you're not going to be able to assess anything else.
And then you go into legislative, I guess, or whatever,
Yeah.
which is what rules apply to that
What
item
jurisdiction?
based, I
Yeah.
guess, on where you're sending it, right?
It's based on the product themselves. So for me
Mhm.
in Europe, for example, I would look at, is it coming from US? Is it subject to the US export controls? What EU, meaning EU regulations abroad, but basically if I'm in Poland, I'm going to be looking at Polish regulations because EU regulations vary by country as
Mhm.
well.
Yes, they
This
are.
is why important to look at the country specific regulations. And then, is it applicable? Is it not applicable? If it's applicable, what do we need to do then? So this is type of analysis that should happen.
Excellent.
You're describing, I believe, I mean, from what I'm hearing, and apologies for not, I'm not a big export person, but from what I'm hearing is that you're describing two very different ways of managing export controls in general, the EU version and the US version,
Mhm.
but yet you still need to comply on both
With
ends. And now you're starting to say that even each individual EU country may
Mhm.
manage it or control it even differently within that. But there is a general EU.
Yes, there is a general EU framework, which called framework means each member state implements it, at their national level. That means that you will see there may be different interpretations, different, appetite for risk appetite, and what they want to control. And that's fine within the EU. So it's important to understand that, majority of the things will be the same because we all are part of the Vassana arrangement, which is the base for the commerce control dual use items. But generally, there could be some differences, and this is why it's always good to check the national country regulation first, and then, look whether there is any specific guidance on what you're trying to export. And then
Excellent.
obviously, yeah, and then obviously you have that US piece that if something is either US origin, come from US technology, then this is the piece you also need to analyze as to what restrictions are attached to your transaction, export opportunity, whatever you want to do.
Out of all of that, as you're identifying that, now I come back still to the legal aspect, but this is a little different, which would come into some of the contracts between parties to say you got to make sure you have the right clauses in there to protect both parties, to be quite frank. So that's another part of the legal aspect of it is to ensure that you've got your contracts worded correctly. All right, so then what?
So once you establish that you have a controlled item that is, let's go with the case that is subject to the US regulations, but also subject to EU regulations, and you want to export it out of EU, let's say to United Arab Emirates, maybe UAE, it's a good example. So
Mhm.
if it's a dual use, meaning on the CCO item, you're going to have to obtain the re-export license from US government. That's number one, that will allow you to re-export it to UAE. But also in the same time, let's say if I'm in Poland, I would have to obtain an export license from Polish government to allow me to finalize this transaction. And the biggest challenge is the timing. One can be
Yes.
quicker than the other. That could be few months apart. So it's a lot. It's a big challenge for companies.
You hit on something, and Lalo and I talk about this a lot, and we keep saying to people, you need to vet who you're doing business with. And if you do that ahead of time, who your vendors, who your customers, all that kind of stuff, and you're going through, it lays the foundation so that when you're in the process of actually executing a transaction, it'll make things go a lot smoother and quicker. And in the midst of that, I will say that, this is excellent. But I would also say this is something where, in the scenario that we're talking about, as far as the European companies, any US products that they're using, hey, US company, you need to really look at partnering in a sense with that your client, if you will, in this case, uh, and do everything you can that both of you can be successful. But that European company needs to be successful in being able to re-export. If they're manufacturing a widget, a medical device, a transponder, or whatever the case may be, the US company has skin in the game to say, hey, if you want to be able to make more sales, you guys need to work together so that European company can export the goods. So I love this. This is a good thing, and it makes the sale, if you will, if you're going to be a supplier, a
Mhm.
bit more of an integrated customer supplier alignment, isn't it?
Yes, and what I was going to say is as well, export compliance, it's, if, for many years was a side function that everybody thought, oh, another compliance thing we need to do. Today, we have a completely different landscape of the regulations. And I think quicker you get your assessment done, I call it, this is the last letter of the clear regulate. Do the risk assessment, look at your customers, partners, whatever portfolio, look at your products. Are they, export controls? Look what your market is. Because once you plan it, then you can think about what licensing is required, what conditions you have to meet. That could be done in advance in certain cases. But this requires the analysis.
Well, I would say we're going to need to wrap up because of time, but Lala, this is a great topic and discussion. I'm glad you brought it into our schedule. That as we're talking through this is one of those things where the example you used of the announcement this past Friday, it's like, whoa, wait a minute, we need to look at this and see. Not only is there an announcement out there, but companies need to be very agile, I guess would be the word, that you can adapt quickly, you can change, and you can jump on things quickly. I mean, Lala, is that do you have that same assessment?
I'm sorry, you're asking me?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah. No, yeah, most definitely. Because I mean, I'm sitting there listening and reading on my feed about what's happening with Anthropic, and I'm thinking to myself, I mean, here internally, we're at Global Training Center, we used several and different AI models, and not we don't have any foreign nationals or anything like that, but not knowing, as small as a company that we are, and we're not. I mean, I guess it's unfair. We are a U.S. I'm sorry. We are a company that knows about trade and all that kind of stuff because we teach it, right? I mean, I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying, what if I was a law firm? You know what I mean? And they use a lot of AI, and they might employ somebody, a foreign national, maybe an intern, and they already
Mhm.
have that in their workflow. And Anthropic all of a sudden throws in the Mythos model, or Fable, and you're using it and they are using it, like it's kind of unintentional. You know what I'm saying? And so anyway, but yeah, it's fast and furious, and it can hit you really quickly.
Well, and here's where I see some things going. I was doing a little bit of research. I'm looking here is where there are export opportunities is with going to different countries. I mean, the hot countries right now seem to be India, Vietnam,
Mhm.
Mexico, UAE, throughout Europe as well. But the type of industries, machinery, aerospace, of course, agriculture and petroleum are in there, but those kinds of things come into play where, oh my gosh, you need to step back and go from an executive level. You probably need to turn internal to your team and say, do U.S. export controls have any effect on our sales? Go back and look at this. We may be doing business and have for a long time. Have there been changes that now we need to look and tighten up something? Our clients in Europe, or especially in Europe in this discussion, do we need to reach out to them? Are there some things there that we need to be reaching out, maybe a value add as a supplier to help them and make sure they're successful? I mean, Anna, what do you think about that?
Yes, definitely. If we were talking like 5 or 6 years ago, the regulations were more stable, meaning that there was, you could manage it. There was a changes, now and then, but it was not like today. Today, the changes are rapid and evolving constantly. So, whenever there is a change in export compliance regulations, you do really need to do a quick assessment on your company and even reach out to your parties, even in Europe, to say, hey, there is a change that might be affecting your business or might not, but just a notification because these things happen these days very fast, and there are all sorts of different restrictions that can impact business globally.
It probably would be worthwhile for some of the C-suite to have a discussion to put their company through a few little exercises of a short timeline of, okay, let's come up with a scenario and execute what would happen. Hence the risk assessment. You've got audits is one thing is of certain things. Others would be, it's like, okay, this has happened. What do we need to do? And if you see a situation where there's a breakdown in systems, data, or whatever IT side versus the compliance side or purchasing or something like that, right there shows you a weak link to say, hey, whoa, wait a minute, what do we got to do? And tighten up so the team, so that IT is working more cohesively with the other parts of the company or vice versa.
Definitely IT these days going to play a vital role in, there is a lot of the AI developments of tools currently, and that's going to be our future. But obviously they need to work closely with any compliance, export compliance, ethics, and so on, to be able to build a system that actually are compliant.
Well, Anna, I appreciate you coming on our show. We have this is one of those that is this is a heavy topic, to be quite frank. There's a lot of implications on this as we go through. If you see some things that continue to develop, especially on the European side, that would affect, because the other side of this I'm thinking is, all right, what about U.S. companies and complying with European export controls? Maybe there's some things there that need to be coming more cohesive, if you will, between the two. But we'd love to have you come back and talk to us in more detail on that.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you very much. There is lots of happening. So, export compliance seems to be the field right now that is really growing fast in many countries. And the changes are, there is a 21st sanctions package just announced in EU. So, things are moving.
Oh my goodness. Well, I appreciate you so much. Lalo and I definitely, Lalo, this is a home run, buddy, for getting Anna on our show with us.
Thank you.
To our listeners, listen, again, this is something, step out there and talk with your legal, talk with your purchasing, talk with your C-suite from a standpoint, it be more of the chief operating officer versus the CEO and your chief legal counsel, to talk about things of what do you need to do based on, this is current stuff. This has just happened. What are you going to do? You need to sit and talk about it and say, hey, there's some discussions on this. Even if you don't know it's a case, talk about it and then say, who do we need to talk to see if we may be in trouble or have an increase in liability or something like that. And obviously, we're going to have Anna's contact information on our show notes, but reach out to experts so that they can help assess based on the recent notifications and announcements from the U.S. Like us, share us, go for, we appreciate your listenership. And also, this is a show that you probably want to share with your European counterparts for the most of our listeners here in the U.S. for sure. So, Lalo, thank you, buddy. You've done a good job. And Anna, you've done wonderful. We appreciate you being on the show.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you, Anna. And thank you very much. And we'll talk soon.